They learned his rules long before they learned his face. In the palace of Blackthorne, the laws were not written on parchment but carried in whispers, in lowered eyes, in the way footsteps slowed near certain corridors. King Aldric ruled from stone and silence. He did not shout. He did not need to. The court moved to the rhythm of his unspoken will, and everyone knew that breaking his rules was not a mistake. It was a sentence waiting to be carried out. The women of the palace understood this better than anyone. Servants, attendants, singers, wives of minor nobles, each lived under an invisible weight that pressed harder with every passing day. Aldric's rules were simple in words and impossible in practice. Do not speak out of turn. Do not look too long. Do not listen where you were not summoned. Above all, do not be seen when you were meant to be forgotten. Mercy was not part of the system. It had never been built into the design. When a rule was broken, there was no public accusation, no trial, no chance to plead ignorance. The king believed fear was most effective when it traveled ahead of the punishment, when the consequences were known but never fully described. Those who disappeared were rarely named again. Their absence did the speaking. Doors closed more quietly after that. Conversations shortened. Laughter thinned until it sounded like guilt. King Aldric watched everything from behind carved stone screens and shadowed balconies. He observed how people revealed themselves when they believed they were alone. He took note of hesitation, curiosity, defiance disguised as carelessness. To him, order was sacred, and women, in his mind, were both the most fragile part of that order and the easiest place to enforce it. Breaking a rule was not an offense against him alone. It was, as he believed, an infection that had to be removed before it spread. The palace itself seemed to participate. Narrow halls swallowed sound. Heavy curtains absorbed secrets. Torches burned low, as if instructed not to witness too much. Every woman sensed it sooner or later. The palace was not a home, not a place of service, but a mechanism. And King Aldric was its cold, deliberate hand. On the night the first rule was broken in months, no bells rang. No guards shouted. A single candle was extinguished in a distant chamber, and that was enough. Somewhere deep within the palace, a decision had already been made. The woman who broke the rule did not intend to. Intent, however, had never mattered in Blackthorne. Her name was Elara, and she had learned early how to move like a shadow, how to lower her gaze without appearing weak. She had survived years by understanding what was expected and giving nothing more. That night, all she did was listen. She paused behind a column when voices rose in a chamber not meant for her ears. She told herself it would be a breath, a heartbeat, and then she would leave. The words she heard were not secrets of war or plots against the crown. They were smaller, more dangerous things. Doubts, complaints, quiet questions about the king himself. By the time Elara realized the weight of what she had overheard, it was already too late. The palace had a way of noticing hesitation. Someone always noticed. She was not seized immediately. That was Aldric's way. He believed fear ripened best when given time. Elara returned to her duties the next morning, hands steady, expression calm. But the palace had shifted around her. Conversations ended when she entered a room. Eyes slid away too quickly. Even the stones beneath her feet seemed colder, less forgiving. By nightfall, she understood. A woman who breaks a rule is not taken suddenly. She is allowed to imagine escape. She is allowed to hope the king has not seen her. That hope is part of the punishment. When the summons came, it was delivered without words. 2 guards standing where there had been none before, their presence enough. They did not bind her. They did not threaten her. They escorted her through passages she had never walked, deeper into the palace's older bones. The air grew stale. The torches were spaced farther apart, their light weak and trembling. Elara counted her steps, not to measure distance, but to stay anchored to herself. King Aldric was not waiting in a throne room. He never was. He preferred places where power felt unavoidable, low ceilings, narrow chambers, rooms where silence pressed in from all sides. When she was brought before him, he did not rise. He studied her as one might study a flaw in stone, deciding whether it could be corrected or must be broken away. "You listened," he said at last. His voice was calm, almost disinterested. Ilara opened her mouth, then closed it again. Apologies meant nothing here. Explanations were treated as insults. Aldric leaned forward slightly. Rules are not made to be understood, he continued. They are made to be obeyed. What he ordered next was not recorded. It never was. But the women of the palace would feel its echo soon enough. No one saw what happened after Ilara was led beyond the final archway, but everyone sensed the shift that followed. The palace breathed differently the next morning. Servants moved faster, as if chased by something invisible. Doors were closed that had long been left open. Even the guards avoided certain corridors, choosing longer paths rather than passing near the places where the king's will had been enforced. King Aldric did not announce punishments. He allowed consequences to reveal themselves slowly, like a stain spreading through cloth. Days passed before Ilara's absence was acknowledged. Her duties were quietly reassigned. Her chamber was emptied before nightfall. By the third day, it was as if she had never existed at all. This erasure was deliberate. To Aldric, memory was a privilege, not a right. Then the changes began. New rules appeared without being spoken. Women were instructed to walk in pairs. Certain halls became forbidden at specific hours. Conversations were reduced to necessities only. The palace did not need explanations. The women understood instinctively that Ilara's fate had not ended with her removal. It had become a warning. Aldric believed punishment should reshape behavior, not simply end a life. Death was too quick, too merciful. He preferred outcomes that lingered, that altered how others breathed, how they slept, how they measured their words. What he did to women who broke his rules was designed to be remembered without ever being described. From his private chambers, Aldric observed the results. He watched shoulders tighten. He noticed how eyes dropped faster than before. Fear had returned to its proper place. Order had been restored. To him, this was justice. Not cruel, not excessive, but necessary. Mercy, he believed, weakened authority. And weakness invited chaos. Yet something else followed Ilara's disappearance, something Aldric did not account for. In the silence she left behind, the women began to communicate without words. A glance held longer than it should. A pause before obeying. Small, nearly invisible acts of defiance, buried so deep they could not be punished without unraveling the very system that created them. Aldric sensed it, though he did not name it. The palace was obedient, yes, but obedience born from terror carried a dangerous weight. Fear could control bodies, but it sharpened minds. And somewhere within Blackthorne's stone walls, the women were learning exactly how far his rules could bend before they broke. The king responded not with restraint, but with refinement. Aldric understood that fear, if overused, dulled. He needed precision now, not spectacle. The punishments became rarer, quieter, more surgical. One woman was reassigned to duties no one returned from unchanged. Another was confined to silence so complete that even her name ceased to circulate. Each act was isolated, deniable, impossible to piece together into a single truth. The women learned to read absence the way others read scripture. A chair left empty at supper. A cloak hanging where its owner no longer stood. The palace taught them that survival depended on noticing what was missing. And still, mistakes happened. Not from rebellion, but from exhaustion. Living under constant vigilance eroded even the most careful mind. Aldric began to summon women alone, not to accuse, but to watch. He asked questions without meaning, measured their responses, noted tremors in their hands. He enjoyed the moment when they realized the summons itself was the test. Those who revealed fear too openly were marked. Those who hid it too well were watched even closer. What made his rule unbearable was not the violence, but the uncertainty. No one knew which rule mattered most, or when it would change. Mercy required clarity. Aldric offered none. He believed confusion was a tool more effective than chains. Deep within the palace, old chambers were reopened. Places built for correction, not confinement. Their purpose was not whispered, only implied. Women avoided even thinking about them, as if thought alone could draw attention. The king did not need to threaten. The architecture carried the threat for him. And yet, beneath the obedience, something hardened. Fear stopped softening into submission and began turning brittle. Each punishment removed a piece of Aldric's humanity in the eyes of those who served him. He was no longer a ruler to be appeased, but a force to be endured. In believing mercy unnecessary, Aldric overlooked its true function. Mercy did not weaken power, it humanized it. Without it, his rule became absolute, and absolute things, like stone under pressure, do not bend. They fracture. The palace remained silent. But silence, when stretched too long, becomes a sound of its own. The fracture did not announce itself. It never does. It began in the smallest exchanges, in moments too brief to punish. A hand lingering a second longer than permitted. A warning passed through a folded cloth. A door left unlatched just enough. These were not rebellions. They were instincts, the quiet assertion that the king's rules governed bodies, not souls. Aldric noticed none of this. His attention had turned inward, consumed by the maintenance of control. He trusted his system because it had worked before. Every ruler he admired had ruled through fear. What he failed to see was that fear, once internalized, no longer needed him. The palace obeyed out of habit now, not loyalty. Another woman broke a rule. This time, it was not curiosity but fatigue. She spoke when she should not have, correcting a minor noble who had misstated an order. The silence that followed was immediate and absolute. Everyone present understood what would come next. The pattern was familiar. The outcome was expected. But when the summons came, something had changed. The woman did not tremble. She did not plead. She walked with a stillness that unsettled even the guards. Aldric sensed it when she stood before him. Fear was there, but it was contained, controlled. That disturbed him more than defiance ever could. He delivered the sentence as he always had, without ornament or explanation. The machinery of punishment moved into place. Yet the effect was not what he anticipated. The palace did not tighten. It grew quieter, but not with obedience, with watchfulness. What Aldric had done to women who broke his rules had gone beyond mercy for so long that mercy itself had become unrecognizable. There was nothing left to take from them that fear had not already consumed. And when fear reaches its limit, it stops functioning as a weapon. In the corridors of Blackthorne, the women began to understand something the king never would. Rules enforced without mercy eventually lose their power. They create not order, but endurance. And endurance, given time, becomes something far more dangerous. The palace waited. Not for justice. Not for rescue. It waited for the moment when fear would no longer be enough. King Aldric sensed the waiting, though he could not name its source. The palace obeyed, yet it no longer reassured him. Silence, once his ally, had become dense, watchful. He found himself listening for sounds that never came, measuring his authority by the absence of resistance. It was an unstable measure, and deep down he knew it. He responded the only way he understood, by hardening further. Rules multiplied. Movement was restricted. Women were separated, assigned new quarters, new routines, new limits. He believed fragmentation would prevent unity. What it did instead was strip away the last illusion of fairness. The system revealed itself fully, and in doing so, lost its mystery. When another woman vanished, the palace did not flinch. There was grief, but it no longer carried shock. The women absorbed it in silence, storing it carefully. Memory, once erased by fear, returned as a quiet archive. Names were not spoken aloud, but they were not forgotten. Aldric's greatest mistake was believing erasure was permanent. He began to rule from behind closed doors, trusting reports more than his own eyes. The chambers where punishment occurred were sealed, their function complete. Fear no longer needed demonstration. Yet Aldric could not escape the sense that something essential had slipped beyond his control. The women had learned his patterns. They knew when rules mattered and when they were only noise. They learned how to appear compliant while preserving something untouched. Aldric's authority pressed against them constantly, but it no longer entered. It could bruise, exhaust, even destroy, but it could not shape them anymore. What he had done to women who broke his rules had stripped his reign of any claim to justice. Beyond mercy lay only repetition. And repetition, without purpose, breeds decay. In the end, Aldric ruled a palace that functioned perfectly and believed in nothing. That belief, once gone, could not be punished back into existence. The silence remained, but it no longer belonged to him. The final shift came without violence. No cries, no sudden chaos, no moment that could be pointed to and named. It arrived as certainty. The women of Blackthorne no longer feared the king in the way he required. They still obeyed, still lowered their eyes, still followed every visible rule, but inside, the meaning had changed. Fear had been replaced by distance. King Aldric felt this distance more sharply than any rebellion. When he passed through the halls, heads bowed as always, yet something essential was missing. The air did not tighten. His presence no longer bent the room around him. Authority, once absolute, now echoed hollowly against stone. He summoned women more frequently, seeking the reaction that had once confirmed his power. He found only restraint. Faces carefully empty. It was as if the palace had learned to endure him the way one endures weather, inescapable, but no longer personal. In ruling beyond mercy, Aldric had removed himself from consequence. No plea reached him. No hatred reached him either. The women no longer imagined justice or revenge. They imagined survival after him. And that was something his rules could not touch. The palace continued to function. Orders were followed. Punishments were carried out when required. But Aldric ruled alone now, surrounded by obedience that no longer believed. He had won control at the cost of meaning, and meaning, once lost, does not return. What he did to women who broke his rules ensured that no one would ever break them again out of care, loyalty, or fear of him. They obeyed because it was simpler, because resistance was unnecessary, because he no longer mattered in the way rulers must. Beyond mercy, beyond fear, beyond even hatred, Aldric's reign entered its final state, endurance without allegiance. And the palace waited, not for his command, but for the day when his rules would vanish with him, leaving nothing behind but stone and memory. King Aldric never saw the end of his reign coming. There was no uprising, no blade in the dark, no final accusation shouted across the hall. Power did not leave him in a single moment. It thinned, day by day, until it was only a title carried by habit. The palace obeyed because it had learned to function without belief. When Aldric walked the corridors, he was alone even when surrounded. The women he once ruled through fear now regarded him as something already fading. They followed his rules with mechanical precision, not because they feared punishment, but because the rules no longer touched who they were. He had pushed them beyond mercy, and in doing so, beyond him. His punishments became rituals without effect. They no longer reshaped behavior or reinforced order. They simply repeated a pattern whose purpose had been forgotten. Aldric sensed this decay but lacked the language to understand it. Mercy had never been part of his rule, so he had no way to reclaim authority once fear failed. In time, his voice grew rarer. Decisions were delegated. The palace ran itself. When illness finally confined him to his chambers, nothing stopped. No urgency spread. No prayers were whispered. Life continued with the same controlled rhythm it always had. When King Aldric of Blackthorne died, the palace did not mourn. It adjusted. His rules were reviewed, then quietly abandoned, one by one, as unnecessary. The women remembered what he had done, not with anger, but with clarity. Beyond mercy, beyond cruelty, his reign had taught them endurance. Stone remained. Memory remained. And in the absence of fear, something else took its place, something Aldric had never understood, and therefore could never destroy.